My name is Nancy Grandin. Some of you actually I see smiles. People know my mom, Debbie, who worked on the bridge and did a lot of things, so that's my mom. I am president of the Simsbury Pollinator Pathway, and I have my notes here. So, like many people, I will be switching my glasses, so now you're all a nice big blur, but I can see what I need to say. So, a couple of housekeeping notes. We have the room until 8:30, and then the library closes immediately. So what we're going to do is, after the presentation, there will be time for questions. At 8:20, we're going to close everything down so everybody has a chance to collect themselves and be out, so that the library can close at 8:30. And if there are people who have questions that don't get answered, you can email us on the sheet of paper that you have that talks about the Simsbury Pollinator Pathway. There's a way to reach us at the bottom. It's actually me. You can email me at the SPP email address that's there. And actually, feel free to email me. I like getting emails. So feel free to just, if you have questions about the pollinator pathway or anything else, certainly please use that. But please just know that, again, at 8:20, if there are still additional questions, we will need to sort of close things down. We also, the Simsbury Pollinator Pathway has a Facebook page. If you are a Facebook user, I would encourage you to follow our page. The questions that if there are additional questions, those will be listed on the page, so the answers will be there for you. It's also, we obviously try to tell people what's going on with not just this kind of event, but in general what we're doing. So if you are a Facebook user, that's a good place to get information. Our series, which probably most of you know, is 5 sessions on building home habitats, things that you need to do to make your your yard natural, pollinator friendly. Tonight, obviously, it's Lisa and Madison who will be doing this, and then the other series are every other week. One of them, actually, Marjorie Winters, who is president of the Simsbury Land Trust. If you want to raise your hand, Marjorie is back there. Marjorie will be presenting at one point, and we also have one of our board members, Kyle Testerman, who works for the DEEP, and he will be talking about native bees. So we have lots of good stuff that's coming up. Let's see. The handouts, just again briefly with this, what we tried to do so that I didn't talk about the Simsbury Pollinator Pathway for like 10 minutes of when you really want to be listening to these people. So I did pull together information about us. There are ways to reach us on here, and more information. We do have yard signs, which are really pretty. Right? And this tells people that after you spend your time learning about home habitats, if you'd like to let people know that you've done that and you're part of the Simsbury Pollinator Pathway, we do have these available for you. And this is also one of the ways that we raise funds, so that's very helpful to us, to the work that we are doing in the town of Simsbury to create this pathway. We are a not-for-profit, so any money that we do raise goes directly into building pollinator spaces here. The other side is just some of our favorite native plants. We have been working with Warner's and Bosco's. They are carrying more and more native plants. And the more business that they get, the more business that other local nurseries get, with people asking for native plants, the better it will be. So, and we also this summer are planning a series with both of them where we're going to do some on-site discussions and building container gardens and things like that. So again, a lot of that's going to be on our Facebook page. The other two just are sort of, did you know, sort of some things about pollinators, things about home habitats, and then Lisa and Madison kindly gave us some resources that are going to be referenced in the things that they talk about tonight. We do, you'll see, I think what's happening now is that there are 2 clipboards that are being passed around, just asking for your information. That is only for our use. It doesn't go anywhere else. We're asking for zip codes because I know not everybody here necessarily is from Simsbury, but we still, obviously everyone is welcome. Anybody who wants to come and support pollinators, you are welcome here. So the last and most important thing is, yes, you can pet Flynn, the service dog, because I know that's a question. So thank you again for coming. And one other thing, I'm just going to ask the members of the Pollinator Pathway Board to raise their hands so you can see some of the board members around here. If you have questions about the Pollinator Pathway after this is over, and we don't have to kick you out, please feel free to talk to any one of these people to learn more about what it is we are doing in the town of Simsbury. So with that, I will remember my other pair of glasses and turn it over to Lisa and Madison and say thank you again for coming.
Thanks, Nancy. Before I forget, let me just say one more thing about the handout. I personally don't like it when people hand out like what you're going to see up here because it just wastes a lot of paper because you'll go home and throw it out. So what we put on the resources and references part of the handout is where we get most of our information, and just go to those websites. You'll go down the rabbit hole of really cool information. Turn this on if it's necessary. So that's what's on our part of the handout is really useful resources, websites. We also have some books over here that I'll probably be referencing as we talk, and take a look at them if you get a chance. So my name is Lisa Newell. I have a gardening business. I'm from Canton. I own Cultivated Gardens, and I started it. This will be my 16th or 17th year, I can't remember. I've been doing it a while, and this is a second career for me, and I'm working on my third. So I've been a gardener. I've worked for landscapers. I worked at the Chicago Botanic Garden. I've owned my own business. I worked at Broken Arrow Nursery in Hamden. If you ever want to go to the most fabulous nursery in Connecticut, well, that's hyperbole, but it's really a great nursery, and they're down in Hamden. They're really good. They don't necessarily specialize in natives, but they specialize in really funky, cool stuff. So there's my plug for Broken Arrow Nursery. I like to start with this picture. Of course, monarchs are like the poster child for pollinator conservation, which is good because they're beautiful and charismatic, but there's so many other insects that we need to worry about. But the reason I start with this is because the message we have here tonight is we all can do something in our own little piece of land, whether you have 10 or 15 acres or a balcony with a couple of pots on it. And the reason this illustrates how we can all do something is because I raised this butterfly, and actually the Xerces Society recommends that you don't do that you leave them in the wild. But I saved this guy from the roadside, and he was on the very last milkweed on the side of the road, and it was going to be mowed down. Plus, he was done with it. He had no place to go. So this is just one little micro example of how we can all make a difference. And we need to make a difference because things are not great. What's happening in U.S. habitats? Not a lot of good stuff. But this number of people showing up here is really encouraging. There's going to be more good stuff happening. But right now, there are 45 million acres of lawn in the U.S., and turf is the single largest irrigated crop. And it's not a crop, we know, we can't eat it. It doesn't really sustain anything, doesn't feed anything. Most lawns are kind of ecological dead ends or dead zones, most of them. So that's a problem we are trying to change. 95% of the lower 48 in this country is developed, and we're losing 5,000 acres of habitat every day. So we need to start now. We need to start changing this now. 70% of the native forests along the eastern seaboard are gone. So we need to start figuring out how to rebuild them. Insects. There's been a significant decline globally in the population for the past 50 years. Some research shows that there's been as much as a 50% decline. Has anyone heard the phrase the insect apocalypse or insect Armageddon? Some scientists are saying that's maybe a little hyperbolic. We like to deal in hyperbole, I guess, in in this business. And there's some research that's suggesting that it's not that bad, but we do know that 50% of Midwestern bee species have disappeared from their native habitat, and 25% of U.S. bee species are at risk of extinction. This is just kind of the surface of the problem with insect loss. Our own anecdotal experience. The old windshield test. Do you remember when you were younger and you drive and you have to clean your windshields a lot? How often do you have to clean your windshields now? Not as often. In our experience, we're in gardens every day. Oh, this is Madison Blake. I'll let her tell you a little about herself. But we work together, and we're in gardens every single day, and we see every single day a decline in insects, in bumblebees, and sweat bees, and honeybees are not native, so everyone worries about honeybees, but we see it on a daily basis that they are just going downhill, and it's a little scary. So we are trying to do something about this. Why do we care? That insects are gross, and they make us itch, and they get in our food, and they do damage. So why do we care that they're in such decline? This is an eastern walking stick, and I think it's such a cool picture. I don't know if you can really see his face, but it looks alarmed. He has an alarmed expression on his face. The eyes, and I was really getting along with this guy for quite a while. He was on my zinnias. But we care because we have to care. E.O. Wilson, the famed biologist, ecologist, really brought attention to the biodiversity crisis, says insects are the things that run the world, the little things that run the world. That's why we care. Without insects, 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants are going to disappear, because insects are required for their survival, for their pollination. And without these insects, the food web collapses, which means there's no food for wildlife, there's no food for birds or for the insects, and there's no food for us. So that's why E.O. Wilson calls insects the little things that run the world. When we did this similar presentation last year, I didn't put it in because we were condensing, but there's a Jenga metaphor. Has anyone ever played Jenga? Do you know what Jenga is? The wooden, you pull the wooden blocks out and you hope it doesn't all collapse. Well, there's a scientist from the Netherlands who uses that as a metaphor for the importance of every single species. They talk about keystone species, and we'll get into that more. So keystone species are the ones that are really essential, like the ecosystem is going to collapse without that keystone species. But in the Jenga way of thinking, the Jenga metaphor, it's you're not sure which one you're going to pull and the whole thing is going to collapse. So that's why we think keystone species are really important, but we need to pay attention to everything. Pages. Why is this happening? There's a whole bunch of things that are going on. None of them very good, and most of them are things that we personally, like I said, in our own backyards, can do something about. First off, and probably the biggest one, is habitat loss. 45 million acres of lawn. That's 45 million acres of habitat lost. 5,000 acres a day, and actually that figure is a couple of years old, so it's probably more than that now. So habitat loss is a huge contributing factor. I don't know if any of you remember in the before the pandemic, 2019, there was, this kind of got lost in the pandemic news, the UN report on biodiversity and the extinction crisis in 2019. The UN put out a report that talks about 1 million species are at risk of going extinct, gone forever in the coming decades. And one of their primary factors contributing to that is habitat loss. Pesticide use. That's kind of obvious why that's a problem, and we're going to touch more on that later. Light pollution. This is one that doesn't get a lot of attention, but I wish it got more attention, because we all know about light pollution and the problems it creates for migratory birds and how it throws off their migration patterns, and cities create huge islands of light pollution. Well, light pollution in our own backyard is a problem for insects, because it throws off their biological functions. For example, fireflies need dark to communicate, and it also your back porch light. You go out there in the morning, and how many dead bugs do you see? I mean, that's where the spiders set up their webs. They figured out how to use it, but it just kills a huge number of insects, and causes moths to fly around and exhaust themselves. So light pollution is a real problem, and the solution in your backyard is put a motion detector on. If you're concerned about safety, put a motion detector on, or a timer. Motion detector is better, but light pollution is a big problem. Monoculture crops, lawns, we keep coming back to it, and we're going to come back to it more later. We don't like lawns. I used to say, before I even got into this whole native plants, habitat restoration, all of that, I used to tell people that my professional goal was to eliminate lawns. And little did I know that would literally become my professional objective. Lawns are a problem, monoculture crops in general. And we will talk about, you can't have lawn. We're not saying get rid of your lawn. We're not purists. I just said get rid of your lawn, but I have lawn. I don't use chemicals on it. I'm planting clover. There's good ways and bad ways to have a lawn, and we just want to shrink the lawn. Invasive species, the big three in Connecticut are what? Barberry, burning bush, bittersweet. But there's a million others, and I should have put on the resources the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group.
Yeah.
There's a list, and there's a link on that website that has pictures. It's a really useful website. So there's so many invasive plants. Those are the big three that we deal with the most. Like every day in gardens, we're pulling out this stuff and trying to get customers to rip out their burning bush. So invasive species, and finally, climate change. Sorry, just drool on myself. So the good news here in this really daunting list is that we personally can affect the first four. Habitat loss, pesticide use, light pollution, monoculture crops. We can go home tonight and do something about that. The bugs aren't out that much this time of the year, but we can go home and turn the lights off.
Invasive species too.
And well, I was getting to that, yes. So collectively, individually, we can do something about those four very easily. We can also do something about invasive species by not planting them and by removing them from our area. When you get into bigger areas, it takes more collective effort. And I would say we can also have we also can have an impact on climate change. Just not, personally, we can't have a huge impact. Excuse me. 3 principles to address this crisis. The first one is kind of I read it today. This comes from Doug Tallamy. And if you haven't heard him, get one of his books. We have a couple of examples over here. They're fabulous. You can go to, I'll be talking more about the homegrownnationalpark.org is his website. And there are all these they have a YouTube channel that you can go and watch any one of his presentations. So these all come from Tallamy. And the first one here, humans and natures can coexist. I was thinking about it today, and it actually seems kind of weird to say that, because we're separating ourselves from nature. It's like we're not natural somehow. We need to get over that. We have no choice but to coexist. And a quote from Doug Tallamy is, our dominion over nature is delusional. There's no such thing as an ecologically insignificant area. That comes from the UN designates certain biosphere reserves as areas of ecological significance. And we're arguing that show me an area that's not that's not an ecologically significant area. I don't believe they exist. Excuse me. Talking too much. And we're all responsible. And that's why it's so encouraging to see this many people show up to talk about this. To some degree, I think we're probably preaching to the choir a little bit. You wouldn't be out here on a Thursday night if you weren't concerned. But we're just talking about every little bit helps, and we're going to give you some concrete, really easy steps that you can take. But we can't just leave it up to the scientists or the conservationists or the environmentalists. All of us are responsible. So your yard is an area of ecological significance. We need a paradigm shift. We need to stop thinking, we need to rethink the idea and our expectations of what a perfect lawn is and what a well-maintained yard is. We're going to be talking a lot. Madison has some fabulous pictures of what we mean when we say be a little bit messy. So we need to rethink what's this whole suburban aesthetic of the perfect green lawn. Who are we gardening for? Is it just for our visual enjoyment? Or can there also be a greater ecological service? We can do both. That's the beauty of this. We can make pretty plants and they can be ecologically serviceable. So I'm just gonna rush through this. You may have read this, you probably know all of this from, I don't know, college biology or high school. Plants are more than just pretty. They produce oxygen, they build and hold topsoil, they help prevent floods, they sequester carbon, and they help buffer extreme weather, and they clean our water. So insects are the little things that run the world, and they support plants, and plants support insects. So that's what we're talking here tonight. So they're more than just a pretty face. So they do all of this, and they look pretty. And this is another Doug Tallamy quote. Plants allow us and nearly every other species to eat sunshine. Excuse me. Choking on my water here. He's not the first one to say it, I'm sure. I've heard other scientists say it, but I just think it's real. I don't really believe in miracles, but if there is a miracle, this is it. That sunshine creates food through the miracle of photosynthesis. Okay, so now we're into the pretty pictures. And when I'm talking about a paradigm shift, I'm talking about things like this. So here we've got, I hope you can see it. I wish I had a pointer. On the left, we've got violets right here, surrounded by some non-native things, some Muscari grape hyacinths, which the bees also like, but the violets are essential. They're host plants for things, and they're provide pollen. And on the right is bluets and a dandelion. And bluets are one of my favorite little spring things. They pop up in lawns. And the reason I like to show this is because these are important early pollinators. I think they're really pretty, but they're usually considered weeds. And this is the paradigm shift that I'm talking about. We gotta stop thinking about these really beautiful, useful, necessary plants as weeds. And then they're especially considered weeds in lawns. And chemical companies have convinced us that we've got to kill them all and are pretty successful at it. So if I told you that there's a plant that's easy to grow, will grow anywhere, it's pretty, it's a pollinator plant, it's edible to us, it's tasty and healthy, and hummingbirds use the seeds to weave into their nests. Who wouldn't want that plant? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, that's it. So this is my friend Mikey. Mikey's no longer with us, sadly, but he's in this huge, big field of dandelions that Mikey's mom never mowed and never put chemicals on. She bought the house, and it was a beautiful suburban Simsbury lawn, and now it's all dandelions, and it makes me very happy. Now we're getting into what you can do. You can grow a variety of native and pollinator-friendly plants. We will talk about what that means. What's a native? What's a nativar? If you've heard that expression, cultivars of natives. What's the difference in our native-Rs? Okay. The answer in a nutshell is sometimes. The 70-30 rule, we want to go for having at least 70% of our landscape that we're in control of be natives, and 30%, we're not purists. I love peonies. Peonies aren't native. I love peonies. That's just one example. So you can plant your non-native plants as long as they're not an invasive. Provide shelter for nesting and overwintering insects. Leave the leaves, and again, we're going to talk about this some more later. I'm gonna tell my broken foot story. Madison and Carl have heard this like at least 1,000 times. 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, I can't remember. In October, I broke my foot. Thank God I had Madison and Carl, her husband, helped finish up with customers, but I couldn't do anything. It was in October, I broke my foot. And so my own garden got zero attention, I mean literally zero attention that fall. And that winter, I never saw more bird activity than I did that winter because I didn't clean anything up. There was a mess for them. They were scratching, they were digging, picking at the seeds. So leave a mess. Leave the leaves, save the stems, is what the Xerces Society likes to say. Be a little messy. Avoid pesticides, especially insecticides. That's kind of a no-brainer, why we say that. You talked about the leaving the leaves a mess, so I'm not going to say more. I want to make sure we get through this so we have time for discussion and questions. And then 4, Nancy had that sign. We need to build, this is an increasing group of people. This is really catching on. We just need to get it caught on quicker. So Nancy had that sign. You can go to the Xerces Society. It's xerces.org, and you can order lawn signs if you don't live in Simsbury. I'm from Canton, so I don't want Simsbury sign in my yard. But there's other really cool signs that say leave the leaves or pollinator garden, all kinds of things. The last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to shut up and let Madison take over, and she's got better pictures, is that native plants feed native insects. So we want to plant native plants. I will give a very brief personal plug. I'm starting to grow native plants from seed, and they're actually pretty easy to grow from seed, and I would encourage you to try it, to collect some seeds and grow things. But I am starting a native plant nursery, so hopefully in a couple years, maybe this year, you'll be able to come to me to buy plants, and Nancy will be able to let you know when that happens. But not all plants are created equal when it comes to feeding native insects. And this is where we're talking about the keystone species. Just 14% of native plants support 90% of the caterpillars. And caterpillars are especially important for bird food, for baby birds in particular. But when we're talking about keystone species, one of the things that is on your resource list is this thing, which is the National Wildlife Federation Keystone Native Plants. And this is a chart for the Eastern Temperate Forests, which is what we are. So if you go to this website, this is the rabbit hole I was talking about. It's listed on the back. It's nwf.org, Keystone Native Plants. So it's a chart that shows you how many, so for example, the first one is white oak, and 436 caterpillar species require white oaks as their host plant. So you go to the website, you click on that, and it will show you which species are rely on oaks, and violets was one of them. And then for each species that you click on, it will tell you how many other things they can use as host plants. And what's really remarkable is how many of these insects, it says one. There is one plant that insect relies on. So a huge number of species, I think it's in excess of 80%, Marjorie probably has better information, 90%, some of that are specialists. They can only use one as a host plant. So if that host plant is not in the landscape, they don't reproduce. So that's why it's so important. So this keystone species concept, when you have a small landscape and you're trying to pick and choose which plants you want to plant, is a really important concept. So some of the most common herbaceous plants when you're talking about gardens are goldenrods and asters and the wild sunflowers, wild black-eyed Susans. Those are the top pollinator plants. Trees, oaks, cherries, willows, birches, cottonwood, maple and hickory, and shrubs. Blueberries, which is one of our favorite plants. A great alternative, by the way, for burning bush is a blueberry bush. But blueberries and willows are keystone shrubs. I'm going to sit down because I can't talk anymore.